Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of March the 30th and March the 31st, 2024. Happy Easter! Yes, this weekend it's the Easter weekend, though it kind of doesn't really feel like it because I'm in the United States and it seems that people rather ignore Easter. Good Friday is not a holiday. I find that completely strange, even though I come from the UK, which is supposed to be an atheist country. I don't know. I suppose it's a reminder that in spite of everything, the United States is a pretty godless place. I know separation of church and state and all that, but I don't know. I think that in the United States, people fundamentally worship money rather than God, and if they do worship God, it's very often a God that they've created in their own image, a God that doesn't inconvenience their own financial interests. But anyway, that's just my view. As far as what I'm going to discuss today, I want to talk about Sam Bankman-Fried, formerly of FTX. We had that huge collapse in 2022, and he has been found guilty in a federal court of taking client money on a massive scale. I'm not quite sure what the precise details of the fraud were, but anyway, he's been sentenced to 25 years in prison, in a federal prison. I'm not quite sure how long he's going to serve. I have read that you have to, if it's a federal sentence, you have to serve 85% of the sentence, which is still quite a long time. I think that's over 20 years. So I've read elsewhere that he might be out in as little as 12 and a half years. I don't know. But I do want to look at his horoscope and what has been happening to him over the last couple of years. I have looked at his chart before, but in the light of this sentence, I think it would be a good opportunity to look at his chart again. I also want to briefly look at Mercury going retrograde. Mercury goes retrograde on Monday, and I want to just consider that. What does that mean for the next few weeks? Who might be affected by Mercury going retrograde? I had a look. I thought that maybe Nigel Farage could be affected, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and also Kamala Harris. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is... I want to look at the astrology and I Ching for the weekend of March the 30th and March the 31st, 2024. So let's have a look at the chart. So top right, that is Sam Bankman-Fried. And as far as the chart is concerned, the moon is still in Sagittarius. This chart, by the way, is set for midnight on March the 31st, as Saturday moves to Sunday, New York time. Basically, the moon is in Sagittarius all weekend. It's separating from a trine to the sun in Aries. Even if that trine is not exact, we get a feel for the lights being in fire signs. Moon in Sagittarius, sun in Aries. The sun and the moon are very sympathetic to one another. And so that does suggest it could be quite a good weekend when things are in harmony. Or I suppose that means a good Easter, when the male force of the sun is in harmony with the female force of the moon. And so in a fundamental sense, things are in the right place, and I don't see massive dramas, but we have to be aware that the moon is making some stressful aspects to Mars and Saturn. So you can see that there is a conjunction between Mars and Saturn building up. Now, this conjunction between Mars and Saturn is well, 7 degrees away. It's not there quite yet, but we need to be aware of it. Mars and Saturn are starting to make their presence felt. And on Saturday, Moon does make a square to Mars, does make a square to Saturn, and indeed the Moon will be squaring the Mars-Saturn midpoint. I therefore think that Saturday could be a more difficult day than Sunday, all things being equal. It kind of depends on your time zone, but with the Moon squaring Mars, then squaring Saturn, the Moon is almost bringing those two planets together. And especially when it's on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, squaring the Mars-Saturn midpoint, that could be a time when there could be frustration and there could be anger. So yes, I think overall it should be a fairly harmonious weekend, but I'm especially thinking about Easter Day. Easter Saturday, there could be moments when we clash with people, where there are disagreements. So we do have to be aware of that. These moments of clash should be fairly brief, but when they do happen, they could be very noticeable. Now, the Moon does go into Capricorn if you are on the West Coast, California, Oregon, British Columbia, at 9:05 p.m. on Sunday. So very late on Sunday. If you're in the West Coast, I suppose if you're in Alaska or Hawaii as well, you might see a little bit of the Moon in Capricorn. But because it's late, after 9:05 p.m., okay, a bit earlier if you're in Hawaii or Alaska, you might feel something, a change of pace. That would be especially if you're out at a party on Easter, on the evening of Easter. But is that likely? As I said, Americans tend to go to bed early. So I think overall, we can treat the Moon as being in Sagittarius all weekend long. Are there any other things going on? Well, on Sunday, the Moon makes a square to Venus and it makes a trine to Mercury. I think the square to Venus is probably pretty harmless. Moon square Venus would be a bit of emotional excess. I suppose it could be financial excess, but I don't really think that is anything to write home about. Midpoints. Venus is on the Sun-Mars midpoint. Venus is conjunct the Sun-Mars midpoint, and Mars is conjunct the Sun-Pluto midpoint. I say those midpoints together because they seem to have a similar theme. Venus conjunct Sun-Mars. It may be about taking the initiative, telling someone who you are and what you can do for them. Maybe an opportunity to impress someone or to make an impact when you're with other people. Mars on the Sun-Pluto midpoint, conjunct the Sun-Pluto midpoint. There's Mars, there's the Sun, there's Pluto. You can see Mars is right between the Sun and Pluto. That can be about assertion, being able to impose yourself on your environment and getting your way. It can also be about other people behaving like that. So maybe there are some people who are going to be influential, who are going to be able to assert themselves quite strongly, for better or for worse. I now want to quickly look at the heliocentric situation. I always think it's important to look at the heliocentric positions of the planets, because we shouldn't forget that the Sun is at the center of the solar system. Astrologers often do, but there we go. So here is the position of the planets from a heliocentric perspective. The main thing going on is perhaps the beginnings of an aspect between Mercury and Saturn. You can see Mercury at 5 Virgo making an opposition to Saturn. It's also separating from an opposition to Venus. So really we've got Mercury opposition Saturn, opposition Venus. And we have to remember, but from a heliocentric point of view, remember this is putting Earth in the Sun in the middle of the solar system, and Mercury close to the Sun. I think it only takes 88 days to go around the Sun. So Mercury is a fast mover. It doesn't just move 1 or 2 degrees in a day. It can move 6 degrees in a day. So Mercury is aspecting Venus and Saturn. And so we might say that Mercury is on the Venus-Saturn midpoint. And from a heliocentric point of view, that could suggest communication problems. And that sort of links with Mercury being on the verge of going retrograde. I mean, it's not quite the same thing, but it's both about Mercury under pressure. And with Mercury on the Venus-Saturn midpoint, some of us may actually find that it's difficult to express ourselves, particularly in an emotional sense. We feel perhaps that there's an emotional complication or something we would like to talk about, we might like to resolve it, but we find we can't quite do it. And with Mercury starting to aspect Saturn, that could work in 2 ways. It might be like we can't fully express ourselves, or we might express ourselves in quite a harsh way. That kind of can happen with Mercury and Saturn. Saturn can be a harsh planet, and the Mercury-Saturn connection can be about criticism, using words that cause a lot of hurt. So I think overall we need to be aware of that. And with Mercury about to go retrograde and Mercury on the heliocentric Mercury on the Venus-Saturn midpoint, if we don't have to say something, then possibly we shouldn't say it. And if we can't find the words easily, then again, we shouldn't say anything probably, because words that are difficult could become really difficult when they've actually been spoken. So that's the position of the planets from a heliocentric perspective, and I want to take this back to the geocentric position. And so what I want to do now is look at the astrology for the weekend from the perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of March the 30th and 31st, 2024. Aries, you're feeling quite positive. After all, the sun is not just moving through your sign, but you've also got the moon in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a fire sign. You should be looking beyond your immediate environment, looking for possibilities. And I think that you will be attracted to anything which is new, which is novel, which can help you escape from the mundane reality of everyday existence. Now, that might have a spiritual and religious connection. I mean, let's not forget, it's the Easter weekend. If we're thinking about Easter, that is all about death and rebirth. Now, you don't have to be a Christian to get into the symbolism of Easter. And perhaps, if you're an Aries, there is a sense of recreation. not recreation, but recreation, being able to create yourself anew, maybe being able to give something up. I mean, perhaps a way of life that really wasn't doing you much good, and it might be time to say goodbye to it. And that sense of giving something up, making a break before you find something new, may be more of a feature of Saturday, because on Saturday the moon makes squares to Mars and Saturn. So on Saturday, perhaps as you're trying to find something new, trying to rise above yourself, it may occur to you that there are a couple of things that are really holding you back. And you may realize that it's time to make a break. That's how moon squaring Mars and Saturn might feel. So you may make a decision that something or even somebody has had their day, and that it's time for a new life. Okay, I know that's a bit hyperbolic. This is only a forecast for the weekend. But as you move into Sunday, Easter Day, there may be a sense of new life for yourself. And you'll be helped by the fact that the moon is making a trine to Mercury. So that moon trine Mercury could be like a new understanding, new possibilities. So yes, try to get into the spirituality and even religiousness of a weekend, regardless of what you believe and what you don't believe. In terms of relationships, I've already made a suggestion there. I have suggested perhaps that you may have a realization, especially on Saturday, that some people really aren't doing you any good. But it's just a realization. You don't necessarily have to do anything about it. And it's a realization that sort of comes from deep down. It's not necessarily anything that happens to you on Saturday. It's more what happens when you give it some private thought. Then on Sunday, we can't deny the fact that the moon is making a square aspect to Venus. And from an Aries perspective, Venus is about other people. And I think you might find that one particular person is being irritating. You know, even if you're not talking to them, even if you're not with them, just the thought of them makes you slightly irritated. And you don't necessarily have to do anything. It's just a sort of quiet acceptance that perhaps this person isn't doing you any good. But I don't want to turn it into a big issue. It's just a quiet realization. Overall, though, this weekend, Aries, you are in a strong position, and you can make things happen. And if there's really something you want, I really believe that you can get it. Taurus, this weekend you may feel that you want to give the whole matter some thought. The whole matter, whatever that matter is, it needs some thought and it needs some contemplation. And perhaps you don't want to get massively involved with other people and their issues. That's fair enough. I mean, there really is stuff to think about. And at the same time, you may find that friends, associates, people you thought you knew well aren't really up to scratch. That's especially on Saturday, because what happens on Saturday is the moon makes square aspects to Mars and Saturn. that moon square Mars is, that could be about relationships, moon square Mars. A relationship that is somehow grating. It doesn't really feel right. And you then have to work out what do you actually do about it. Is this a temporary situation, or is it something more prolonged? And I would suggest that on Saturday you avoid social gatherings. I know that Saturday, particularly Easter Saturday, is a day for having parties and meeting people, but I don't think you're going to be in the mood. So if you're invited to something, then it might be a good idea to just turn the invitation down, because you just won't be on particularly good form. Now, that's not to say that you can't assert yourself. I do think that over the weekend you will be assertive. You can tell people what you want. You can bring to bear the full force of your personality. But just because you can look after yourself and be assertive doesn't mean to say that you should surround yourself with other people. You can perhaps be assertive at a distance, perhaps over the phone, or having very short meetings with people where you express your view of the world. On Sunday, the moon is making a square to Venus, and it's not aggressive and really annoying like moon square Mars, but moon square Venus can still be about feeling a sense of irritation, having to do something you don't really want to do. You feel that your natural impulse is to sort of hang back. And I think, Taurus, you should probably follow your natural impulse, because there is work to be done on your own, or perhaps in a place where you feel very comfortable, and you shouldn't feel that you have to be out there all the time. Gemini. Mercury is about to go retrograde. I said that yesterday, so I'm saying it again, just to remind you. Mercury is your ruler. Mercury is now coming to a standstill, and you can really feel that. So I would have said Gemini. I would have said Gemini that now is not really the time for starting new things, because just as they're starting, you might have to call a halt to them, or you just won't be in the mood. And I do think it's just very important that you have a long-term perspective. Mercury doesn't go direct again until April the 25th, which is that's over 3 weeks, isn't it? So don't be in a hurry to get things done. Still, I think you are going to have to engage this weekend with the outside world. It's possibly not something you want to do, and especially on Saturday, it might be a real pain. That is because the moon is moving through Sagittarius. Sagittarius is your opposite sign, and it being your opposite sign, strongly related to other people. So with moon in Sagittarius, moon moving through Sagittarius, you're very aware of how other people are having an impact on you. And in many respects, it's not something you're comfortable with, because on Saturday, the moon is making square aspects to Mars and Saturn. I think you're possibly going to quite resent other people's influence on you. You may feel that they're really restricting your freedom of action. It's a situation where, on one hand, you don't want to get too mad about it, particularly if it's just some short-term irritation. Yes, someone might be irritating and annoying and wasting your time, but how long is it going to go on for? If it's going to last for just a few minutes, then just grin and bear, I would have said. If it's going to last a lot longer, well, you do have to watch what you say, because this weekend, if you are put under a lot of pressure, you might say something quite hurtful. The reason I'm saying that is from the heliocentric perspective. You can't see it on the chart I'm showing you here, but when I looked at the heliocentric chart, I showed you how Mercury was opposition the Venus-Saturn midpoint. And that heliocentric opposition could have a particular impact on you. And it could encourage you to say something quite hurtful. And you might argue, well, it's not your fault. If you're pressurized, if people get in your way, do things you don't like, then sure, you're going to say something that's hurtful. But ideally, you should try to avoid the situation. That means perhaps planning your social life, making sure that you're only with people for short periods. Maybe before you meet someone, tell them, oh, you've got another appointment somewhere else. So try to keep your social interactions light. And that does include one-to-one relationships. I know one-to-one relationships may be important, it is the weekend, but you have to ask, are you really going to be able to benefit from them? Are you really going to be able to let go and be with someone with the moon? Yes, the moon is in Sagittarius. You're very aware of one-to-one relationships, but I'm just concerned about that square between the moon and Mars and the moon and Saturn on Saturday. That could make things really difficult. If you are going to spend time with one person, then possibly you should focus your energies on Sunday rather than Saturday. I think overall Sunday is an easier day than Saturday, especially as on Sunday the moon makes a trine to Mercury. And provided you don't say too much, then I think with that moon trine Mercury, you and someone else can have a relatively harmonious connection with each other, and perhaps you can take advantage of the fact that the moon is in Sagittarius and the sun is in Aries. They may not be in exact aspect they may not be in exact trine aspect on Sunday. In fact, they won't be, because that trine between the sun and moon is breaking up. But still, you've got the moon in Sagittarius, sun in Aries. They're both fire signs, and with the moon making a trine to Mercury, provided you don't talk too much, then I think you and someone else can have a relatively harmonious connection with each other. Cancer. The moon is your ruler, and so if we want to know what's going on this weekend, we do very much have to look at what the moon is doing. And from a Cancerian perspective, with the moon in Sagittarius, you do want to be in control. Now, the reason you want to be in control with the moon in Sagittarius is because the sign Sagittarius occurs to Cancer in a particular way. So different signs occur to different people differently. depending on their sign. And so it occurs to you in a way that is quite disciplined. You need to make sure that everything is in order. And so this weekend, you're not going to really be in the mood for surprises. You'll want to have a plan, and you'll want that plan to proceed in an orderly fashion. Will it proceed in an orderly fashion? I think it can, provided you are open-minded. You must not accept that everything is going to go your way, and you probably need to accept that there will be some challenges. Challenges that actually may have an impact on some of your core beliefs. So, what do you believe in? I suppose it being Easter weekend, it being a very Christian weekend, beliefs are important, and you do need to consider what you believe, what you don't believe, and it may not always be easy to maintain a set of beliefs. And if you get annoyed about something, it may be because your beliefs are being challenged. So Cancer, I think you really do need to consider that. But on a more down-to-earth level, I think what might happen is that if you are going anywhere that you are not familiar with, perhaps you haven't been there before, or if you're meeting people who are strangers who you don't know anything about, that's where the irritation could be, because you have no way of being able to work out what they're going to do. You have no plan in your head. And so when the surprises happen, you may not take kindly to these surprises. So I could say, Cancer, that you should avoid unfamiliar people and unfamiliar environments. But maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe you need the challenge. And if you find yourself being irritated by a person or a place, then rather than project that irritation outwards, you should perhaps consider what that irritation is really about. It may be about your own close-mindedness. Now, I'm not accusing you of being a close-minded person, but we can all be close-minded in certain situations. And perhaps over the weekend, that is something that you have to confront. And I do think that Saturday is going to be an easier day than Sunday. I think there'll be fewer irritations, and I think you're more at risk of exaggeration rather than annoyance. Exaggerated emotion, perhaps. Doing something which is slightly excessive. It could be financially excessive. Yeah, do watch out for over-expenditure on Sunday, particularly if you're going out to somewhere like a restaurant or I suppose a lot of places shops are open on Sunday. I suppose even if they're not, people can buy things on the internet. So yeah, watch out for a bit of excessive behaviour. And also on Sunday, the moon trines Mercury. That is a nice aspect that allows you to get your message across. It's almost like right at the end of the weekend, you can say what's on your mind. Even though Mercury is about to go retrograde, that happens on Monday, you will be able to say something useful. And in fact, because Mercury is going to be at a standstill on Sunday, it may be at that moment of standstill It's like a pause before Mercury goes retrograde. You'll be able to get your message in, and your message may actually have a powerful impact. Leo, you certainly want to have a fun weekend. I mean, why not? Easter weekend, it's a holiday. Even if you're in America, it's still a holiday to an extent, isn't it? And you can be creative. You can enjoy yourself. At least that's how it feels. But there may be on Saturday things trying to hold you up. Perhaps on Saturday you're going to have to confront some of your own fears. That is a possibility. You want to do something, but you will be worried about the implications of it. You know, what will happen if you do it? And at the same time, you may find that another person is not very helpful. They try to restrict you. They try to raise objections, and you may feel that it's easiest just to give in, do what the other person says, or don't do what the other person doesn't want, and to be a bit of a martyr. Is that a good idea? Well, it depends on the situation. But if you want to do something that's really important to you on Saturday, then I think you should do it. I don't think you should sacrifice your freedom just to make someone happy in the short term. Sunday, I think things do become easier. I think there's going to be less restriction. It's not that Sunday is necessarily going to be a good day with more opportunities. The opportunities will be the same on Saturday and Sunday. It's just more about your state of mind. I think on Sunday you're going to find it's just easier to express yourself, easier to get things done. Though don't jump to conclusions. There is some danger, Leo, that sometime over the weekend you use a lot of force. You know, you act in a very, very dramatic way. And the reason you do this is quite bizarre. It may be a misunderstanding, or perhaps you've made a mistake and you do something dramatic, and as a result of doing something dramatic you could cause a lot of damage. It's almost delusional. So Leo, while it's important that you have freedom this weekend, that you're able to express yourself creatively, you need to do it in a steady way. If you find yourself being tempted to do something really dramatic, almost explosive, then Leo, I would suggest that you hold back and consider the possibility that actually you are mistaken. Virgo. As I was saying to Gemini, Mercury is about to go retrograde. You know, like Gemini, Mercury is your ruler, and we therefore have to pay very close attention to what Mercury is doing. This means that things are slowing down in a big way. If there are plans that you want to put into action, then maybe you've missed your moment, or you're about to miss your moment, and you're going to have to be patient. Mercury doesn't go direct until April the 25th, so in certain situations you might have to wait. And as far as the weekend is concerned, I would advise you to take it slowly and to do things on your terms. I mean, that's what you want to do. Will you be able to do things on your terms? Well, on Saturday it could be tough, because on Saturday the moon is making square aspects to Mars and Saturn. I think that could have an impact on you. You may find that there are certain people and situations that are really messing you up. They're almost like blocks. They don't want you to do something. They don't want you even to do nothing. Why not? Why shouldn't you be able to do nothing? But no, that's not good enough for some people. They want you to just appear as if you're doing something, even if that something is useless. They just want to, almost feels like they just want you to be wasting your time and aggravating yourself. I think you should therefore be strict with yourself and with others. So, for example, on Saturday, you may not be in the mood to do something, and someone asks you to do something. And it doesn't seem a big deal. This something may only take 5 or 10 minutes, but you're not in the mood for doing it. You feel that you can't really be bothered to say, no, you can't do it because it's only for 5 or 10 minutes. But I would think you should be bothered, because the trouble is, if you do something that you don't want to do, then there is a danger that you completely mess it up. I know Virgos don't like to mess things up, but if you're under duress, you could easily mess it up. Perhaps at an unconscious level, you will deliberately mess it up because you want to make it clear to someone that they were wrong telling you to do something. So I would therefore say, Virgo, that you need to be strict with yourself, and you need to be strict with others. If you don't want to do something, if it's a real pain, if it disturbs your peace of mind, then don't do it. Saturday, though, is more difficult than Sunday. The moon is making this square aspect to Mars and Saturn. As you move into Sunday, this isn't such an issue. The moon actually makes a trine to Mercury. That trine between the moon and Mercury it's quite fortunate. And so on Sunday, you're going to have greater scope for thinking and for relaxation. Yeah, a couple of people are going to be annoying on Sunday, but not in a major way, not in a way that I think you have to cause, big eruptions and demonstrations of how much how the demonstrations of how important it is for you to be in control. I don't think you have to do that. Sunday is an overall more gentle day. Though I should point out that Mercury, just over the weekend in general, is making stressful heliocentric aspects to Venus and Saturn. Indeed, Mercury is on the Venus-Saturn midpoint. That's you from a heliocentric perspective. And that perhaps gives you an idea about the overall picture. If you have got Mercury on the Venus-Saturn midpoint from a heliocentric perspective, that's just reminding you that solitude has its importance. You don't want to be too closely involved with people. If you are too closely involved with people, as I've just said about how you might unconsciously mess things up, if you get too closely involved with people, you might do things that you really weren't expecting to do. For example, insulting someone. Yeah, you could do it. The insult will just happen. You won't even know you're about to insult someone. The words will just come out. And that's a sign that you're under pressure. So give yourself a break and actually give other people a break by not interacting with people under duress. Only interact with people this weekend if you want to interact with them. If you don't want to interact with them, then you should not interact with them, not just for your benefit, but for their benefit as well. Because, as I said, you're capable of causing a lot of damage this weekend. Libra. It's a nice weekend, I think. It can be a nice weekend. You're able to express yourself relatively well, provided you have freedom of action. You know, when you are a free spirit, you are a good person to have around. You're fun, you're not too intense, and you can make people happy. And I think also, Libra, there is a sense in which you're quite exciting. You're the kind of person that can make things happen. Yes, you have dynamism there. And dynamism is about really thinking about what you want to do and perhaps realizing that what you want to do can be in everyone else's best interests. They might not realize it at the time, but it is in everyone else's best interests. And that means, Libra, that you have to be a little bit assertive. You know, if you just do what other people say, if you're a passenger this weekend, okay, things aren't so good. Then there could be problems. Yeah, especially on Saturday when the moon makes a square aspect to Mars. If you start to do things that other people want you to do and you don't express your ideas, then you could be miserable. But I don't think that situation is necessary. Just remember, you know best, not just for yourself, but for others. And if you are prepared to be assertive over the weekend, then you'll be surprised how much people will listen to you. You know, they'll take the view that you really know what you're talking about and that you're someone who can be followed. So that might be hard work. Librans don't always like to adopt that approach, but this weekend it is definitely the approach to take. And your decisiveness has two sides. It has a positive and a negative side. The negative side is about in telling people what needs to be done, what needs to be got together, telling people to do things they don't want to do. That's the negative side. The positive side is about having new ideas, saying, why don't we do this? And somehow, Libra, I think you can bring all those things together. And, you know, people want to be told what to do. And Libra, you're the person to do it. It's not about being a control freak. It's quite gentle. It's having a gentle influence and always knowing what to do at a particular time. There should never be a vacuum, because if there is a vacuum where you don't know what to do, where you don't know what to tell people to do, then you're creating a space for other people to create their demands. And other people's demands this weekend are not going to be helpful. They're going to be disruptive, and they're going to be annoying, and they're going to spoil the harmony. So make sure you're gently in control, especially on Saturday. I think that Saturday is a more difficult day than Sunday. Saturday is a day when you really have to make sure that you really are being listened to. On Sunday, I do think that you can be more relaxed, and I think it's going to be just easier to be yourself, and I don't think that it's going to be quite so necessary to exercise direct leadership. Scorpio. You are thinking about practicalities this weekend. I mean, I know it's a weekend where people want to relax, especially the Easter weekend, but you are thinking about the future, and you're thinking, I believe, about financial matters. Yeah, money does matter, and you're aware of the ways in which people can make financial mistakes. Indeed, you can make financial mistakes, and it's actually possible to make financial mistakes over the Easter weekend. That really can happen. And Saturday in particular, the moon is making a square aspect to Mars and Saturn. Now, this Mars-Saturn conjunction, which is forming, it doesn't become exact for a bit of time. It's not an immediate issue, but you shouldn't forget that Mars, your ruler of Scorpio, is slowly getting closer to Saturn. And so on Saturday, when the moon makes a square aspect to Mars and a square aspect to Saturn, you may get a reminder of what's going on. It may be like a preview of something happening next month in maybe a week's time, just over a week. So this preview could be difficult. You can see how outside events could really mess you up. And you may also be aware that financially something isn't right. I'm not saying it's terribly wrong, but it's not right, and now might be a good time to start to address yourself to it. So, for example, if someone is making a mistake with money, or an organization is making a mistake with money, even though it's a weekend, then I think you should perhaps tell them about it. You might think it's completely inappropriate. Why would anyone care? Why would anyone listen? But perhaps if you talk about money over the weekend, at a time when it's inappropriate to talk about money, you might have a powerful influence. People might think, oh, if Scorpio is talking about money now on a Saturday, oh, well, it must be serious. So that might be the way to approach the matter. And also, Scorpio, you are in a strong position. You might not feel yourself to be in a strong position, but let's not forget that Mars is your ruler, and at the moment Mars is conjunct the Sun-Pluto midpoint. So the pair, Sun and Pluto, are about having a firm sense of yourself and being stubborn and not backing down. And that's you. And yes, this weekend you really can get your way. So don't underestimate yourself. It's a weekend of real power. The pressure is highest, I think, on Saturday. I think as you move into Sunday, things do start to get easier. I think you might find that it's easier to get things done, and it's true that there may be one or two people who are a little bit irritating, but I wouldn't take it too seriously. And at the same time on Sunday, you're going to be able to get your message across. After all, the moon is making a trine aspect to Mercury, especially if you want something done on Sunday. So if you want something done on Sunday, Scorpio, I think you'll just be able to get that message. You'll be able to tell people what you want, how you want it done, and I think by and large they will listen to you. And really, that's the weekend. I think you just have to have a strong sense of self this weekend. And in terms of money, if something's bothering you financially, and it's a kind of bother that you feel is related to other people, then tell them about it. Of course, it may be, Scorpio, that there's something going on financially that you need to deal with on your own, that you don't necessarily need anyone's help with. It may just be that you need to think something through. And on Saturday, when you look at your finances, I think you will be tempted to look at things from the worst possible perspective. And that's good. It's always good to look at your finances from the worst possible view, because if it's from the worst possible view, then things can't get any worse, and you might overreact in terms of making more savings than you have to. That's good. And so through a very disciplined, tough approach with your own finances, on Saturday you can really lay the foundations for your own financial security. At least that is a possibility, but it does depend on your situation. Sagittarius. The moon is right in the middle of your sign. It's moon in Sagittarius weekend. I think in some respects that's good. That's the way it should be. You're feeling comfortable, and you're now away from all of that Moon and Scorpio stuff that you had, Thursday and Friday. Moon and Scorpio perhaps wasn't much fun for Sagittarius, but now you feel like you're getting your freedom back. And on Saturday, particularly early on Saturday, you can feel the influence of the moon being trine the sun. The moon in Sagittarius, sun in Aries, fire signs, things are moving. If there's some fun activity you want to do, then go and do it. Don't apologize. Don't feel that you have to get anyone else's approval. Just go and do what you feel is necessary, something that you really want to do. I would nonetheless advise you, particularly on Saturday, not to spend too much time with members of your family unless you know them very well, unless you're completely on their wavelength. Because I think there's some danger that members of your family and your home environment in general could in some way restrict you, just prevent you from doing what you want to do. And there could, in certain situations, be real annoyances. People asking you to do things which are unreasonable. And that could drive you crazy. You might feel, though, it's the weekend, Easter weekend. It's a time for families, isn't it? Well, I don't know, Sagittarius. I don't think it necessarily is a time for families, unless your family is completely supportive of what you want to do on a sort of creative and inspirational level. If they are, that's fine. But if they're not, And if they think that some of your interests are a bit weird and irrelevant and they're not supportive of your interests, then yeah, I would have said be very wary when dealing with your family. So should you stay away from your own home? In certain situations, yes. Particularly on Saturday. I think Sunday is an easier and more relaxed day when you don't have to be quite so defensive. I think people will just accept you as you are, and you won't have to apologize so much, if at all. As far as relationships are concerned, as I think I might have said on Friday, Mercury is your relationship ruler. After all, Mercury is ruler of Gemini, and Gemini is your opposite sign. So Mercury goes retrograde on Monday, and Mercury is now slowing down in a big way. And this might mean that some of the people in your life, particularly the people who are close to you, are becoming quite indecisive. They don't really know what they want. You might want to tell them what they should want, but that's not reasonable because they're going to change their mind anyway. So if you're waiting for someone to make a decision or to make a commitment, then wait until the end of April, because Mercury is going to be going retrograde until April the 25th. And so over the next few weeks, I would just bide your time and don't try to force decisions out of people. And this weekend, really don't try to force decisions out of people. Yeah, they might make a decision, but I think they could go back on that decision very quickly. So let people develop in their own way, and don't get offended this weekend. I think there may be times this weekend where someone quite close to you says something that you find upsetting, or at least you could be upset by it. Don't take people's words to heart. I don't think they necessarily mean anything. They're just words, and that should be your overall approach. Besides, it's a weekend where individual freedom does matter. Your individual freedom matters, and also everyone else's individual freedom matters. Your freedom to be creative, other people's freedom to be indecisive and not to have to make their mind up about anything. Capricorn. I think ideally, Capricorn, you would have quite a quiet weekend. You wouldn't feel pressurized to do anything. You can do everything just at your own pace. And that's the way it should be. Is that the way it will be? Well, I think there could be irritations, especially on Saturday. So Saturday, the moon makes a square to Mars. The moon makes a square to Saturn. Where are these irritations coming from? They could come from your own head. They could be about your own worries. There is scope this weekend, especially on Saturday, for having irrational fears. And so perhaps, yes, you want to spend time alone, but if you spend too much time alone and you're not doing anything, then that's allowing your own fears and worries to start to manifest. And that is not something you want. I would therefore suggest, Capricorn, that you do keep busy. Yeah, especially on Saturday. You make sure there's always something going on to occupy your mind, because if your mind is idle, then your mind could be going in all sorts of different directions. And the question is, can you find true relaxation? I think it may be hard. It would be nice to do nothing this weekend. Do nothing, plan nothing. But the trouble is, if you do nothing, plan nothing, as I've said, your unconscious mind has been given a chance to just mess things up for you. So I think you should have plans this weekend. Plans to do stuff that is sort of gentle, doesn't require huge amounts of effort, but requires enough effort to make sure that your mind doesn't mess things up for you. And I would say, well, you should associate with other people. Maybe other people can be amusing. But no. I think other people could actually let you down this weekend if you give them a chance and actually contribute to your concerns. People might make promises and go back on those promises. You might find that social interactions are just much slower and drawn out than you had expected. So I would not put yourself in a position where you are reliant on anyone, because I think in that case you could find yourself being let down. And of course matters aren't helped by the fact that Mercury is about to turn retrograde. And from a heliocentric perspective, Mercury is opposition Saturn, and that's especially the case on Sunday. So Saturn is your ruler. Mercury opposition Saturn heliocentrically could be about someone irritating you. They're just not doing what you expect, or it could be about them saying something that annoys you. Or of course it could be about you saying something in response to what they say or do, which just makes things a lot more difficult. So I think you're getting the image here that it may not be the best weekend of the year. And so I think this weekend, probably just what you need to do, as I've said, you just need to be engaged in low-profile activity where you just feel you're doing something useful. But what you mustn't do is rely too heavily on other people, including people who you know and trust, because this weekend they just may not be on particularly good form, and yes, they might let you down. I'm really sorry to be so negative about this weekend. I'm not being super negative. I'm not saying anything terrible is going to happen. I'm just saying that it's a weekend where you just might feel that you're not being terribly well supported, and that you may have to rely on your own devices. But as I said, keep busy. Aquarius. I think Aquarius, you are going to be in the mood for social interaction. I mean, why not? Moon's in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is an exciting place for the moon to be in, and from an Aquarian perspective, the sign Sagittarius is connected with socializing. Now, just because you have decided to socialize and meet people does not mean to necessarily say that you're going to have a good time. And I don't know whether you were listening to what I said to Capricorn, but some of that applies to you as well. I think you could be let down this weekend. If you've assumed that people will honour their promises, will turn up to things, you may be disappointed. Even if people do turn up to things, they may not be on very good form. socially, just things are going to be slow and drawn out. And that's especially the case on Saturday. I mean, on Saturday, the moon is making a square to Mars, and it is making a square to Saturn. That's difficult. And yeah, your friends might turn up to things. You might talk to your friends. You might be with your friends, but they're not going to be on good form, I don't think. You're going to feel a certain sense of disappointment, and you may be wondering whether it's really worth it. And even if you're not engaged in your social life, if you're, for example, let's say you're working on Saturday. I mean, some people do work on Saturdays, and of course in America it's pretty irrelevant, the fact that it's an Easter weekend, isn't it? But still, if you are doing any work on Saturday, you may be disappointed. You may feel that things are really slow, that you have to make a real effort to get anything done, and you may have to make a real effort to get cooperation from other people. So I think it's important, Aquarius, that you don't have too many expectations. Sunday, overall, I think is a better day from Saturday. I think for everyone, I've gone through the 12 signs in general. Sunday is a better day than Saturday. I think there will be more flow, and in terms of other people, it's going to be easier to make connections. It's going to be easier to have good conversations. Perhaps because there won't be the expectations. I think on Saturday there could be expectations, and those expectations could be dashed. You try to arrange something, it just doesn't work. Sunday, there aren't the expectations, and perhaps because there aren't the expectations, it's easier for things to actually happen. Though, be careful on Sunday about expenditure. There might be a moment on Sunday where you find yourself spending too much money, whether you're shopping on the internet, you're going out somewhere. So be careful what you spend on Sunday. So if something on Sunday is costing you more than you expect, then don't get involved with it. I don't know. So if you say you're going to do something which has a price tag, work out what that price tag is before you make a commitment. But aside from that, Sunday does see a trine aspect between Moon and Mercury, so I think things should flow certainly much better than Saturday. And so on Sunday, I think it should be an okay day. Not a spectacular day, but a day when you realise that some people can be trusted. Some people are on okay form and can provide you with some entertainment, even if that entertainment is fairly modest. Pisces. I have been a little bit negative in terms of my delineations of the 12 signs for this weekend. I know people like to hear positive stuff at the beginning of a weekend. They want to know that it's going to be a good weekend. And so, I feel a bit bad about that. As far as you are concerned, there is this square aspect between the moon on one hand, and not actually two square aspects between the moon and Mars and the moon and Saturn. And I've been very negative about this square aspect. But for you, I think this square aspect between the moon on one hand and Mars and Saturn on the other could actually be very useful. Reason being because we've got the beginnings of a Mars-Saturn conjunction. Now that Mars-Saturn conjunction is not exact today. It's not exact until, I don't know, another week. Oh, hold on, let me tell you exactly when that Mars-Saturn Mars-Saturn conjunction is going to be exact. It's going to be exact, I think, on the 10th of April. And that is a note for the near future. But that Mars-Saturn conjunction takes place in your sign. It takes place in Pisces. And it may actually put you in quite a strong position, a tough position, when people are forced to take you seriously. And on Saturday, the moon, while moving through a high-profile sector of your chart, through Sagittarius, makes a square to the Mars-Saturn conjunction. And for everyone else, it's a problem. But for you, I don't think it is a problem. I think it allows you to be very serious and very motivated, the kind of person that people take seriously. And I think you're going to be able to get your way. Now, people might not like doing things your way, but I don't think they'll have I don't think they'll have a choice. And this particularly applies if you're doing something useful over the weekend. I don't know, if you're working over the weekend, particularly if you have a position of authority, then people will listen to you and you'll be able to get things done. If you're not working over the weekend, well, consider the authority you do have. Where are you in authority? Maybe in your family, maybe in your circle of friends. Whatever authority you have this weekend, make the most of it. Saturn is in Pisces. Mars is moving towards a conjunction of Saturn. The moon is squaring both Mars and Saturn. This is all about your authority and how you can assert yourself. And yeah, especially on Saturday, you can really have a powerful impact. And also over the weekend, the Sun is making a decile to Jupiter. So the Sun and Jupiter are 36 degrees apart. That's 1/10 of the circle. That's the kind of style you are challenged to create. And I think your challenge is to create a style which is expansive and dramatic and optimistic. So yes, you can be in a position of authority, but you also, if you want to be an effective authority figure, you also have to present a vision. You have to tell people how you'd like things to be and how that vision is in their interests and not just your interests. So I think that could be very useful. Finally, Pisces, I should remind you that on Monday, Mercury goes retrograde. Mercury rules Virgo, your opposite sign. So Mercury retrograde can have an impact on some of the people around you. They may not be as reliable as you had expected them to be, and at the same time they might be indecisive. And Mercury is retrograde until April the 25th. So do consider that and do understand other people's weaknesses and the fact that they are in a process of trying to work out what's going on, and they're possibly not in a position to really make up their mind about anything. That's it. And I'm now going to look at the weekend from the perspective of the I Ching. And I ask the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And I only got one hexagram. It didn't move. And in a way, this hexagram completely contradicts what I've said astrologically. This is why it's important, as far as I'm concerned, to use the I Ching as an alternative. And this might be a relief. So if you've been listening to my delineations of the 12 signs, you might have been concerned about my negativity. And remember, this is just my perception. I may be completely wrong. And the I Ching seems to be suggesting maybe I am wrong, because the I Ching has this hexagram for the weekend. This is about what the weekend is going to be like. And there's a single hexagram. It doesn't move. And it's hexagram 14, possession in great measure. Arguably, it is the best of all 64 hexagrams. I mean, it can literally be about getting something. It could be about money. If you want something, you get it. Although we have to remember that I Ching tends to look at things in a more spiritual sense. Possessions may not just be about money, but it may be about the things we have already. It's a reminder of the things that we have already. It's our knowledge, it's our experience, it's our skills, it's our abilities. It's all there for us. We have what we need. And because we have possessions in great measure, there is no limit to what we can achieve, or no reasonable limit to what we can achieve. So the I Ching is really asking you to be really positive, and there may be possibilities to get something extra, though we shouldn't forget that the possession in great measure is locked. It doesn't move to any other hexagram. There are no moving lines. And because there are no moving lines, I'm sort of put in a situation where I feel that I need to get some background information. And if I want to get background information, I can look at the nuclear hexagram. And the nuclear hexagram means taking off the top and the bottom line and treating the fifth, fourth, and third lines as the top three, and the fourth, third, and second line as the bottom three. And that gives us a nuclear hexagram of 43, which is breakthrough. And when we talk about breakthrough in the I Ching, it is about something that perhaps has to be dealt with. And in fact, the Greg Winkup sees breakthrough in his translation of the I Ching as actually being about withdrawal. We see there's a problem. We can see that other people are being stressed and we have to get out. I mean, he uses the imagery of hearing prisoners being captured, like being in an army, because Greg Winkup takes a view that the I Ching is sort of made for sort of Chinese warlords. And so when you hear your forces or your allies being captured and the cries of prisoners, that is a time you have to get out before it's too late. Now this is, by the way, this 43 is not the hexagram that I got for today. It is 14. It's just giving some background information, and maybe this is telling us about the response to the difficulties on Saturday. Remember, when I was looking at the astrology for this weekend, I was indicating that Saturday could be quite a difficult day because you had this moon square Mars-Saturn, and that might be the cries of the prisoners. We know that something's wrong, and that underlies the whole situation. And because we know something's wrong, we get out before it's too late. And that allows us to create a situation, and this may relate more to Sunday, this allows us to create a situation where we are not just safe, where we have removed ourselves from the immediate problem, but where we are in a position to actually benefit from everything that's available. So this is perhaps telling us really what it's all about. We can make the most of our possessions. We can perhaps gain more possessions because we've been able to untangle ourselves from a difficult situation. And maybe that's what the weekend is all about. Now I want to look at Mercury going retrograde. I don't want to spend too long on this, but I think it's just important to just, I hate that word, give you a heads up. That's a horrible word, heads up. I hate that. But I suppose I'm giving you a heads up, a very late heads up on Mercury going retrograde on Monday. Yeah, heads up, I hate that phrase, but I've just used it. So let's see. That's the chart for the weekend, and this is the chart for Mercury going retrograde. This is the moment Mercury goes retrograde, which I make it at 11:15 p.m. That's 11:15 p.m. On April the 1st. So that's on April Fool's Day. Let me just make sure I've got that right. Yeah, on April Fool's Day, which is Monday, Mercury goes retrograde. And this is the precise time it goes retrograde set for London. Now, by April the 1st, the clocks will have gone forward in Europe. I think this weekend in Europe and UK, clocks go forward. So we're now back to a situation where New York and London are 5 hours apart, and Los Angeles and London are 8 hours apart. And so 11:15 p.m. is going to be 3:15 p.m. in Los Angeles. It's going to be 6:15 p.m. on the East Coast, New York, and so forth. It's going to be tomorrow if you're on continental Europe, and Australia, New Zealand. It's going to be a long way tomorrow. So when I say that Mercury goes retrograde on Monday, it depends where you are. For a lot of people, Mercury will go retrograde on Tuesday, which won't be April Fool's Day. It will be April the 2nd. This chart is set for London. I just find it interesting that it's such a difficult chart set for London. Maybe this is telling us what's going on in the UK. From a London perspective, Saturn is exactly on the IC when Mercury goes retrograde, and Uranus is exactly on the descendant. This Mercury retrograde period, particularly if you're in the UK, could be very difficult, perhaps from a political point of view, especially. Remember, I think we've got local elections in the UK at the beginning of May, where the Tories are predicted to do extremely badly, and this could put further pressure on the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. So that's Mercury retrograde. Doesn't look as if it's going to be fun for the UK. So just a reminder, Mercury goes retrograde, and it stays retrograde until April the 25th. It goes backwards through Aries. It doesn't go back into Pisces. And so between now and April the 25th, we do need to be careful about how we communicate. Communications may not hit the mark. If we need to say something important, we shouldn't be afraid of repeating ourselves. And if we're making important journeys, we should allow extra time between now and April the 25th, because things might go wrong. We might not reach our destination in time. So just allow lots of leeway. And if you're planning on starting a venture, maybe you should wait until after April the 25th, unless that venture is really important. I mean, for example, if you've got an essential operation that needs to be done, then you can't wait for the planets. You have to have that operation done. There might be other things, you can't. I mean, like in the US, you've got tax. When is the tax deadline? Is April the 15th. You can't not do your tax return because Mercury is retrograde, because there is April the 15th is a deadline unless you get an extension. And if you need to get an extension, then you must allow plenty of time, because with Mercury retrograde, if you are in America and it is tax season, remember, Mercury is retrograde. Allow extra time for things to get done, paperwork to be in, because there's plenty of scope for delays and mistakes. So really watch out if you haven't completed your tax this year, if you are in the US. Now, there is an idea that the Mercury retrograde does not actually resolve itself until Mercury returns to the place it was when it was retrograde. So you will see that Mercury goes retrograde at exactly 2713 Aries. And the Mercury retrograde does not resolve itself until Mercury goes retrograde, goes forward on April the 25th, and then finally returns to 2713. So Mercury returns to 2713. I think on, let me just tell you when that happens. It happens on, I make it May the 13th. So that's a long time, May the 13th. So it won't be until May the 13th potentially that this whole Mercury retrograde thing has resolved itself. Now, I quickly want to look at 3 charts of people who I think might be impacted by this Mercury retrograde. I'm going to be very vague. One chart is Nigel Farage. This is Nigel Farage's chart. We do have a time of birth for him. Clearly, this Mercury retrograde we know is going to put a lot of pressure on him because he has to consider the level of his political involvement. He's being talked at. We're talking about Nigel Farage as being someone who could politically have a big influence if he were to play an active role in British politics in a run-up to these local elections. Yeah, it could be very important. And Nigel Farage's Jupiter is at 27 Aries. So Jupiter for Nigel Farage would be the whole way he imagines the future for himself and for his country. And so Mercury goes retrograde on his Jupiter. So perhaps for Nigel Farage, he has to think about what he wants. And I think it's going to be quite a big weekend, next few days for Nigel Farage, when he's going to have to really work it out. Perhaps he hasn't made a decision yet. And I know we think about Mercury retrograde, about not making a decision, but over the next few weeks, Mercury hitting his Jupiter, he does have a lot of thinking to do. Someone else is Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State. He's got issues with Gaza, hasn't he? And of course, the war in Ukraine, which from the US's perspective is going from bad to worse. He has got a Sun-Mercury conjunction at 26 Aries. So I don't know his time of birth, by the way. So Mercury goes retrograde exactly on his Sun-Mercury conjunction. So for Antony Blinken, there is a lot of thinking to do. Something may suddenly occur to him, and I don't know. He might realize something, but there may be a point of indecisiveness there for Antony Blinken. But I think that what's going on in Gaza and Ukraine, perhaps other parts of the world, is going to be quite overwhelming for him with Mercury going retrograde. I know it's with Mercury going retrograde on that point. I know it's overwhelming in general, but it's like Mercury is coming to a standstill on his Sun-Mercury conjunction. And so because it's coming to a standstill, Mercury for Antony Blinken is behaving like an outer planet. It's behaving like Saturn or Jupiter or Uranus. So it's as if he has an outer planet of the nature of Mercury on his Sun-Mercury conjunction. He really is hit by something. And it may be events in Ukraine. Maybe events in Ukraine are going to be moving fast and he's just not going to know what to do. Though notice he has Uranus trine his Sun-Mercury conjunction. So with Uranus trine his Sun-Mercury conjunction, he's going to feel he's going to want to do something. The question is, will Antony Blinken's initiatives, the things he do, be the right things to do? Right thing, particularly as Mercury is retrograde. Things may not be as he expects. Finally, there is if you're in America, it's your vice president, Kamala Harris. There is Kamala Harris. She has her moon at 27 Aries. And you can see that we do have a time of birth for Kamala Harris. So with Mercury exactly on her moon, I think that is really important. Remember, it's a female chart. So in a female chart, arguably, the moon is opposition the sun. And we notice that Kamala Harris has an exact sun-moon conjunction. See, there is her moon at 20... Sorry, let me say it again. Sun-moon opposition. So she was born on a full moon. So her moon is at 2739 Aries. Her sun is at 2748 Libra. So we do have this exact full moon. And with this full moon, Mercury hits it. And because Mercury hits it, she's going to feel it. So I think the next few weeks, we're going to hear about Kamala Harris. I think with this Mercury going stationary on her full moon. Even if we don't hear about it, I think there are things going on, realizations. It's about realizations. Certain things will occur to Kamala Harris that hadn't occurred to her before. And, I know people like to underestimate Kamala Harris. They say how useless she is, how unpopular she is. Astrologically, don't underestimate Kamala Harris. However useless she seems, don't underestimate her. And her Vedic chart really does show that. But anyway, we'll see how that works out. Finally, I wanted to look at Sam Bankman-Fried because he has been given a 25-year prison sentence. And here is Sam Bankman-Fried's chart. There's his natal chart. So he was born March the 5th, 1992. So he's really young. He's 32 years old. He's been sentenced to 25 years in prison. If he were to serve all that 25 years, he'd be in his 50s by the time he gets released. Of course, it's unlikely he's going to serve that time. That looks as if, the most optimistic estimate I've heard is he could only have to serve to 12 and a half years. I don't know whether that includes time served, so he could be out in his 40s. So, what is going on with Sam Bankman-Fried? And what about his chart? One thing about Sam Bankman-Fried's chart is that he has the moon at 28 degrees 50 Pisces. He has the moon on Skeet. The moon on Skeet, Skeet is the fixed star of disasters, shipwrecks. So there is the capacity here in Sam Bankman-Fried's chart for someone to create disasters and shipwrecks. And I know it's a male chart, and you think that you should be looking at the sun here, but he was born on a new moon. There's the moon. So the moon is kind of, you'd expect the moon to be more projected, but maybe, he is a Pisces, and perhaps he's shown, the various aspects of Pisces. I mean, he's very clever, obviously. But Einstein was a Pisces. But he does have perhaps some of the chaos of Pisces. He says, people have accused him of all sorts of dreadful things. I think he generally didn't know what was going on. That's my opinion. With that Pisces, and that moon in Pisces is really what was a difficult moon in Pisces. So, what was happening when FTX went bankrupt? I think that was November the 11th, 2022. So I just quickly wanted to look at the Sam Bankman-Fried's solar return prior to FTX going bankrupt. So this was his March the 5th, 2022 solar return. When you look at a solar return, don't just look at the sun, also look at the moon. That is important, lunar aspects. At the time of his solar return, the moon was at 26 Aries. This is for 2022, not for 2024. I'm just looking at just before the big event in November 2022. He had the moon in Aries. There was a Venus-Mars conjunction here. He had an exact Venus-Mars conjunction at his 2022 solar return. Now, I know some people think, oh, Venus-Mars conjunction, that's great. It's all about sexuality and being desirable and all that kind of stuff. But Venus-Mars conjunction means that Venus is conjunct Mars. Okay, Mars might benefit from being conjunct Venus, which is the lesser benefic, but Venus is seriously damaged by being conjunct Mars, and Venus is arguably a sort of a universal significator of money. And so Moon is moving towards a square of Venus-Mars, of that Venus-Mars conjunction. So I don't think that that square between the Moon and Venus-Mars was necessarily a good thing. Also, he was just coming out of a Sun-Neptune conjunction. So his Sun, 15 Pisces, so I don't know precisely when, but I don't know, would that have been a year before, a couple of years before, he would have had Neptune conjunct his Sun. So as he was setting up FTX, getting involved in his various activities, Neptune was conjunct his Sun. He didn't really know what was going on. There was maybe, okay, he might have been deceptive as well, but that's all the Neptune stuff. But that's one way of looking at it. But we could look at it in another way. We could say, oh, well, how long does it take for the Sun to catch up with Neptune? Because when you're dealing with the Sun, particularly the Sun in solar returns, it's often a good idea to use symbolic measures. 1 degree equals 1 month. So basically the Sun is 7 degrees away from Neptune. So let's count 7 months. So it may be that 7 months into his solar return, we might expect something bad to happen. So March, April, May, June, July, August, September. We probably would have technically have expected something to happen, I think, around the beginning of October 2022. That's when the Sun symbolically gets to the conjunction of Neptune. Okay, it wasn't October, it was November. But with these symbolic measures, you don't need absolute exactitude. I think the solar return did indicate that there might have been problems in the autumn of 2022, and I think that's shown quite clearly. I then want to look at this year when he got this prison sentence. And I don't know what impact this prison sentence has had on him, whether he was expecting it or not, whether he was expecting a lenient sentence of, I don't know, the defense was asking for something like 6 years. Of course, the prosecution was asking for 100 years or something ridiculous like that. Here is I don't chart for his sentencing. I don't know precisely when he was sentenced. We certainly don't have a time for his being this sentence, so it's rather inappropriate to use house cusps. So I don't know when that sentence was announced. But so those are the positions of the planets for the sentencing. And I compared those with his chart. I didn't actually see anything especially dramatic at the time of the sentencing. Yeah, sure, there was some stuff in his 12th house. The 12th house, remember, is connected with prisons. The North Node is the transiting North Node is in his 12th house. So I suppose, does that mean that his destiny is to be in prison? I don't know. There's a nodal axis moving onto his 6th, 12th house cusp, but I didn't notice anything really dramatic. Neptune is moving towards a conjunction of his Moon, and that reminds me of one thing I did forget to say about the bankruptcy. When FTX was declared bankrupt on November the 11th, 2022. Sorry, I should have talked about this. I should have talked about this earlier. Looking at the looking at the bankruptcy chart. This is November the 11th, 2022. I'm not talking about the sentencing. Look at the position of Jupiter. Jupiter was at 2903 Pisces. So Jupiter conjunct the moon. This is a reminder. Jupiter transits aren't always good. Jupiter on his moon. It didn't help the fact that he had moon on skeet. So he had moon on skeet. When FTX went bankrupt, November 11, 2022, Jupiter was exactly on his moon on skeet. Jupiter is the great releaser. If it has to come, it has to come. And that is a reminder, Jupiter transits are not always fortunate. So going back to the sentencing chart, I said I'm not particularly impressed by this chart. But I want to look at other things. There was his solar return prior to him being sentenced. So this is his solar return. His solar return set for March the 5th, 2024. A couple of things to notice. Firstly, Moon is in the 12th house. That figures getting a long prison sentence. Secondly, the solar return has the IC at 1922. So he had Uranus exactly on the IC, and he has Pluto pretty close to the ascendant. So there may be a sense of shock. Maybe it really was a surprise when he got that long prison sentence. I don't know. But it certainly has certainly messed him up, obviously, as it would have done. Solar return, we also have to look at the Sun in the solar return. You can see that the Sun is exactly conjunct the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. So if we look at Vita, rules of planetary pictures, we might get an idea about what it means to have the Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. I haven't looked at this before. I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be appropriate. But what does Vita say about the Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint? He says, this is interesting. Parting guest. Parting person. He's certainly parting. Unruly guest. I don't know about that. Not staying long in one place, to roam. I don't know. I suppose he's roaming from one prison to another. I suppose that's a possibility. I suppose they have to work out what to do with him. Ebertin is another book on midpoints, combination of stellar influences, to see if there's any difference between the two interpretations. So Mercury, Saturn. Ebertin says, this is perhaps a bit more appropriate. Ebertin says, a person with a retarded mental development, a love of travelling, changes, separations, repeated changes of residence. So I get from this a sense of departure. He's leaving. He's leaving the scene, which of course he is. People will talk about him less, and he will be, unfortunately, I don't know. Unfortunately, it depends on your perspective, doesn't it? But he's going to go to prison for a long time. Finally, I wanted to look at Bankman-Fried's solar arc directions for when he got this prison sentence. So I moved all his planets. He's 32 years, about 32 degrees. That's the solar arc directions for. Okay, here it is. Yeah, so these were his solar arc directions for when he got sentenced, moving everything 1 degree for a year. And I just want to compare that with his natal chart. And from a solar arc perspective, notice he has Saturn in his natal chart 1323. If we move Saturn 32 degrees, it moves forward to 15 degrees 12 Pisces. And so his Sun is at 1525 Pisces. So his solar arc directed Saturn was exactly on his sun, which I would have said fits extremely well. Further, and this is perhaps a little worrying, this is worrying, he has a Mars conjunct Saturn in his horoscope. Bankman-Fried, yeah, he's got a Mars-Saturn conjunction in his horoscope. It's a very close Mars-Saturn conjunction, within less than a degree. And Saturn is moving to a conjunction of the Sun, and now Mars is moving to a conjunction of his Sun. So over the next year, he's going to have the Mars-Saturn midpoint on his Sun. Now, that might just be the experience of being in prison, but I would have said the prison authorities really need to watch him over the next year with Mars-Saturn conjunction over his Sun. That's not good. I don't want to make any precise predictions. I'm not making any precise predictions. But it could just be that his adjustment, the adjustment to going to prison for anyone is going to be tough. But I think for him, Mars and Saturn hitting his Sun, really tough. I just hope that he is properly looked after. And I think whatever he's done, I'm afraid I do feel sorry for him, particularly with that direction coming up. I don't think there's anything else to say about that chart. Uranus, solar arc directed Uranus and Neptune. There's another thing coming. There's his solar arc directed Uranus moving towards a conjunction of his Venus. So again, that really shakes things up. So the solar arc directions don't look good. And as I said, I really hope that he's looked after. I know that the judge has said he's going to be going into a medium security prison where the judge has acknowledged his vulnerabilities. So hopefully that is something that will be taken care of. Okay, that's Sam Bankman-Fried, and I hope you found that of some use. If you enjoyed this video, I would of course be grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed and you enjoyed the video, then of course I'd be really grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So it just remains for me to wish you all a happy Easter, and I will talk to you again very soon.